Trump continues to live up to his reputation as a kingmaker when Thomas Massie lost his primary this week in Kentucky to a Trump-backed candidate. The long-awaited DNC 2024 autopsy was released, and it shows that they learned absolutely nothing from the 2024 election, and comedy may finally be returning to the late-night shows after Stephen Colbert's final episode aired this past week. My name is Ben Corriveau, and this is my show. So obviously, the big news this week was that Thomas Massie lost his primary this week, which is absolutely huge because typically incumbent candidates tend to win their elections. I believe it's something like 95% in the Senate and 98% in the House. So it's incredibly difficult to take them out, especially when you have, I believe he was in for 6 terms. And not only that, but Thomas Massie is one of the most popular Congress members. He's repeatedly been ranked by several organizations as the most conservative member in Congress, which, depending on how you look at it, may or may not be true, especially when you take into account his previous terms in office compared to this term, where his votes have been completely different. But, I mean, this was pretty much expected by just about everybody. A lot of people predicted it. I know Michael Knowles predicted it. I believe that the markets, like the betting markets, were predicting it. Polling was indicating that it would be a loss for Massie. So it wasn't a big surprise, but I still hear a lot of people wondering why this even happened in the first place. Why primary Thomas Massie when he's so conservative? And I think that J.D. Vance actually has the perfect response to this, which I'll play right now.
Mr. Vice President, I'm humbled and honored to be here. Recently, President Trump endorsed a candidate to run against Republican Representative Thomas Massie, who has opposed and criticized some of the Trump administration's aims. How would you address those who fear that principled disagreement or independent thinking is discouraged within the party because of how it can be framed as a betrayal, instead of as internal accountability or an opportunity for debate and negotiation?
So it's a very good question. Let me say this one is hard for me. And the reason it's hard for me is because Thomas Massie and I is one of the first people that ever reached out to me about my book or about political office. I've known Thomas Massie well before I ever got involved in politics. Thomas's wife died well, maybe it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It was a little while ago. She died very unexpectedly, was a very sweet and kind woman. And I was probably one of the first people that called Thomas to offer my condolences. I think the problem with Thomas, and I've told him this in private, and now I guess I'll say it in public, is it's one thing to disagree with the party on a particular issue. It's one thing to to have your independent stand on a number of questions. And by the way, some of the stuff where Thomas Massie has been independent against the Republican Party, I've agreed with him with. Thomas and I worked together during 2023, where I was trying to stop the limitless flow of American money to Ukraine, and Thomas was one of the people I was working closest with it. But that's one thing. Being independent, having your own opinions is one thing. Voting against the party on every single issue, you're eventually going to make too many enemies. And that is the problem that Thomas has had. It's not one issue. It's not 3 or 4 issues. It's that every time that we've needed Thomas for a vote, he has been completely unwilling to provide it. That is why the President of the United States has trained his ire on Thomas Massie. It's because we can never count on him for some of the most difficult votes. I wish that that weren't the case. I say that as somebody who's known Thomas well before I got into politics, but politics is politics, and when you always vote against the party, you can't expect the party to actually back you.
So as you saw in that clip, just so you're aware, that clip came out about 6 months ago. I know it's been circulating around a bit now, and some people have been saying it was in the past week. This was approximately 6 months ago that this event was held, and J.D. Vance actually said this. But it still holds true today, where Thomas Massie, this term, so 2024 to 2026, he has overwhelmingly voted against the MAGA agenda, which, I mean, some of his stuff is fairly principled, and that's kind of my reason why I don't like Massie so much this term, because I feel like he pursues perfect policy as opposed to the policy that can actually get passed. So anytime the Republicans need an additional vote for literally anything, he is not a reliable vote, and that's largely why the Republican Party ousted him. I mean, it was just, you're not going to support the agenda that people elected you for, then yeah, we're going to primary you. And I'm hoping that this actually takes hold of the party a bit more, and we actually have more people recognizing that this is something that will happen to you. if you don't pursue the agenda. Because, I mean, just like with John Thune, he's been he's not necessarily openly resistant to the Save America Act, but he hasn't been pushing it as hard as he realistically should, in my opinion. And I mean, it's been months that's just been sitting in the Senate and nothing's happened with it. There's been no vote, no effort to pass it. So I really hope that Thune sees this and recognizes that this is something he needs to do if he doesn't want to get primaried when he's up for election. But one thing I did find interesting, like I said, Thomas Massie this past term hasn't really been voting alongside Republicans. And this is indicated by several factors. I mean, first of all, if you look at govtrack.us, I have the page in my description because I put all my sources there so you can review and fact check any information that I publish here. But in this, he actually is rated as being the 15th most politically left Republican out of 220 House Republicans. So, I mean, that's pretty crazy. And to be fair, I mean, I don't know necessarily the method by which they're conducting this. They do make that public. So if you want to go check it out, you can go further into it. But based on what I've seen, that seems about correct. Because if you look at scorecards for previous terms, he has typically between 90 and 95% conservative rating, which is very good. This term, as far as I'm aware, and this number's from Michael Knowles, I haven't been able to validate it, but he's had approximately a 74% vote in favor of Republican policies, which is a huge drop in actual support for your own party that you're allegedly aligned with. So that's one of the reasons why. But the other thing, too, is he's just been against just about literally every single thing that the Trump administration has been trying to push. One of the biggest ones was the One Big Beautiful Bill, where he was against it because it spent too much money, which is funny because it was a tax cut. So we actually cut the amount of, or it was a tax cut, but in addition, we also cut spending, government spending as a whole. And he said that he wasn't going to vote for it because it didn't cut spending enough. Now, I agree with this sentiment. We should be cutting spending and creating a fiscally responsible budget that is actually balanced. So we're not spending more money than we actually are taking in tax revenue. However, that's not policy that we could get passed right now. I mean, because if you look at the makeup of the House, we have a slim majority in the House right now. So we would have to get all the Republicans to vote in favor of it and have literally no Democrats vote on it, because Democrats right now will not vote for just about anything that Republicans support. And he's taking a principled stand here. I mean, like, we had to, I believe I have this up from Newsweek, we could only afford to lose one vote if we wanted the One Big Beautiful Bill passed. And Thomas Massie decided he was going to be the stick in the mud that wouldn't vote for it because it wasn't balanced. Which literally, if we had tried to balance the budget, we likely would have lost more than one vote and not been able to pass it at all. And this is my primary, like I said, my primary critique of him is that he pursues perfect policy as opposed to good policy. And when you're constantly pushing for perfect policy, that doesn't work in the real world. Not everybody's going to support that perfect policy because a lot of people have vested interests in not doing that. For example, with these bills, Congress or the House of Representatives is literally made up of people representing their districts across the country. So if they have a bill that gives them taxpayer funds or federal funds and supports their community, they're obviously going to vote for it. Even if that is going to make it a not balanced budget, that's what because they're trying to get the most for their constituents. So it just doesn't make sense with that. The other thing, too, is with the Save America Act, he wasn't necessarily opposed to it, but he was opposed to putting it on the schedule because if they were to put it on the schedule, the compromise with the Democrats was that they would create a 24-hour window where they could pass financial legislation without the proper review period, which he was against, and I do agree that that is a bad policy. I don't remember if I actually put up a video talking about that, but I do agree with him that that wasn't a good idea to actually pursue that because obviously they could just pass literally whatever. But if I remember correctly, this was actually during a shutdown that they did this, so they were attempting to allow for passage of a financial bill just in case the Senate were to actually release the legislation, because I believe this was during, like I said, the DHS shutdown earlier this year. And he voted against that. And not only that, but there was literally no financial legislation that was even, as far as I'm aware, up for discussion. So it was, again, a principled stand for no reason whatsoever. So it doesn't really make any sense why he would do that. But he ended up losing his election. It was, I believe it was about an 8-point swing between him and his opponent, which was Trump backed. And obviously, this just goes to show that Trump endorsed candidates win elections. And that's, whatever you want to say about it, that's pretty much how it's looking right now. I mean, because he lost against his challenger, Ed Gallrein. And like I said, this is huge because he was an incumbent. But we also had, this past weekend, it was Senator Bill Cassidy. He got crushed in his primary. I believe he placed third in his primary as the incumbent. And he lost to a Trump-backed candidate, which is also absolutely crazy. And it just goes to show that the MAGA movement is actually going forward and primarying people who they believe are not supporting their agenda. And that's what we really need to do. If you want change, if you want political change, you need to take the people in power that you dislike out of power and replace them with people who you believe will actually represent you properly. And that's what's happening here. But a lot of people wanted to make it out to be, and I'm fairly confident I've voiced my opinion on this. I am so sick and tired of the Israel issue, both the pro-Israel and the anti-Israel people, because I hear it from both sides. I dislike both of them. They're both crazy, and realistically, I have the principled stance, which I know sounds a bit egotistical, but if you are in the middle, you're generally correct in this instance, because I'm not going to say that Israel does everything right, and I'm not going to blame Israel for stubbing my toe in the morning. It's just crazy. But this somehow turned into that, with Thomas Massie's opening comments being as follows.
All right. Listen, I would have come out sooner, but I had to call my opponent and concede, and it took a while to find Ed Gallrein in Tel Aviv.
Because he said this during his thing, we had a bunch of conservatives on the Israel First side saying that this is all because he lost because he was anti-Israel, which there's not really any indication of that. In fact, some of the polling shows that he actually polled quite well amongst younger Americans, which, if you look at the statistics, younger Americans are more anti-Israel. So he was actually, in my mind, doing it to actually save his election chances, because obviously he lost the endorsement of Trump, which was huge for him. And he knew that he was going to lose a large chunk of his base because of it. So he moved to the next greatest voter base, which right now is, unfortunately, the anti-Israel and the grifters, realistically, who don't necessarily believe whatever they're told, regardless of if there's facts and evidence to back it up. But they just won't believe it, and therefore it's all Israel. So we had that, and like I said, I was really aggravated with people saying that it was because he was anti-Israel that he lost, or that he wasn't anti-Israel enough, and that's why it's just stupid. Not everything comes down to Israel. Israel isn't the end-all be-all of all politics. In fact, it shouldn't be the end-all be-all of just about any politics unless you're living in Israel. But that's the case right now. We also had some good news this week, depending on how you want to look at it. So this week, Trump proposed a 1.776, obviously because 1776 is the founding of the country, $1.776 billion fund for victims of political lawfare or political weaponization. This is largely due to what realistically happened last election, or last presidential term with Joe Biden, where he politically targeted a lot of people who weren't necessarily committing crimes, or he was targeting people who were committing by the text crimes, but they were being overcharged in comparison to other people who had committed similar crimes, but were on the left side of the political aisle. So to me, this is a great thing that we're actually pursuing this, and this actually came about as a result of the lawsuit that Trump filed against the IRS, where they leaked his tax documents, which is illegal, but they did that. They also, as part of this agreement, so that they opened this fund, they also They received a formal apology, no monetary payment, obviously, because they wanted to set up this fund instead of accepting a monetary payment. But they also dropped their lawsuits. So the Trump administration dropped their lawsuits against the damages for the unlawful raid of Mar-a-Lago, as well as the Russia collusion hoax, which, like I said, all this is good. The other big thing about this is that it is only set up currently to last through December 1st, December 1st, 2028. So it won't go into effect for anybody going after it unless it's reopened. Like I said, it all depends on how you look at it. In general, I think it's a good policy because it's good to at least help restore the people who were wronged by political weaponization by the Biden administration or previous administrations, because it doesn't just limit it to the Biden administration. It goes back to any previous administration, as far as I'm aware from what I've read. So if you believe that happened to you, you can file a claim and they will adjudicate it and determine whether or not you are actually eligible for part of that settlement or whatever, which, like I said, I think that's generally a good thing. But this has thrown ICE funding into basically into the void, because apparently the Senate is not happy about it, which is crazy because we have this up from Reuters. They believe that it's something that is supposed to be narrow targeted and, they don't want it included in the ICE funding because the ICE funding bill is supposed to be, quote unquote, narrow targeted, focused, clean, straightforward, and it gets a little bit more complicated with this added into it. And Thune believes that this will make it harder to pass, which I realistically don't know how it's going to make it harder to pass, because once again, Republicans have the majority in the Senate. Democrats, we know, are already going to vote against it, so you could already count their votes out. And so what, you're going to say Republicans are going to vote against us, which just means that they're rhinos, which realistically means that we need to primary them. And this is actually putting a fire under their seats because, as you can see here, they're actually talking about how they're not too happy about how Trump has been opposed to Bill Cassidy, and actually Bill Cassidy lost his primary because of this. So this could backfire on Trump. I highly doubt it, because a lot of times these people want to be elected for power, not necessarily to serve the people. And that's why we need to hold them accountable by voting them out of office or primarying them if we don't believe that they're actually voting in favor of us. So that's great. And actually, speaking of that, we had a critical endorsement this week over, this was for the Senate, obviously. We had John Cornyn, because it had been alleged that Trump was going to endorse John Cornyn in advance of this election. He ended up deciding to vote for Ken Paxton, or endorse Ken Paxton, which is huge because, and this is also a huge political blunder by John Cornyn, because Ken Paxton literally told John Cornyn, if you get the Save America Act passed, I will drop out of this election and you can win another term. And they wouldn't do it. And the thing is, because a lot of funds had been poured into John Cornyn's race because they wanted him to continue in, because he's more of an establishment figure than Ken Paxton is. But this kind of shows that the Republicans in the Senate are more willing to remove the people that they actually support from office than they are to pass legislation that 80% of Americans support. I mean, when it comes to this, who really has your best interest in mind? And this is something I've been criticizing them about quite a lot before, because Democrats have consistently been against the Save America Act. That's fine. We already know where they stand on all this stuff, so we could just give them a pass for this. But it's Republicans who are also fighting it. It's not just the Democrats that are fighting it. And we need to criticize both parties for this, because the Save America Act is common sense legislation. We need voter ID in our elections. We don't want people from foreign nations voting in our federal elections. If you want to do it in the state election, I guess that's up to the states. It realistically should be the case, but that's how our system works. So the state can vote for it if they believe that foreigners are more important than their native-born citizens. But we realistically shouldn't be doing that for our federal elections at all. So again, hopefully this puts pressure on Senate Republicans to actually pass the Save America Act. If they do that, I think that that will save a lot of them their seats, and they'll actually be able to continue holding power for longer, whether you like it or not. But I mean, there's not really much going on outside of that. So hopefully that goes through. It's looking like that endorsement may have won Ken Paxton his race, but we'll know because I believe that's over the next few days. So next week we should have an idea of whether or not he's won. So let's hope that that's the case. But last weekend we had a whole rededication of the country to not the Catholic faith, but to Christianity in God, which is great because I've said this before. America is a Christian nation. Yes, we have the First Amendment, and you have every right to practice any other religion. But to claim that this is anything other than a Christian nation is absolutely absurd and historically illiterate, because in order to get to that point, you would have to ignore all of history before the early 1900s, because I believe it was either the 1920s or the 1930s when incorporation doctrine was used on the First Amendment to say that the religious freedom, it was used essentially to eliminate Christianity from the public life, which was bad policy. And the only reason I say that, because incorporation doctrine is generally a good practice. It's due to the 14th Amendment saying that any citizen of the United States cannot be deprived of their rights without due process under the law. And that was used to apply to the Bill of Rights. That's what incorporation doctrine is in the court system. My personal opinion, they made a mistake by including the First Amendment, because First Amendment explicitly states that it only applies to Congress. I don't know how you can spin that into saying that it's all of a sudden everywhere, everywhere across the country. I do think that it's, in some instances it's a good thing, in some instances it's a bad thing. That's the rules we live under right now, so take that as you will. But after this rededication, so Mike Johnson gave a speech, and he received some criticism for it. So before I play the criticism, I'll play the clip of what he actually said in his speech.
You safeguarded George Washington and his ragtag army as they defeated the mightiest of empires. And you gave our fathers the wisdom and faith to establish this new nation premised on the biblical and foundational principle that all men are created equal and free before you. Through your divine providence, our founders acknowledged and boldly proclaimed the self-evident truth that every single person is created in your image, and that we are endowed by you, our Creator, with our unalienable rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Lord, we know that that declaration, which has been recognized as our nation's creed, has also been the inspiration for the single greatest force for peace and justice and human flourishing. It set in motion a change of events that altered the very course of human history. And today, as we seek to fulfill its true meaning, those self-evident truths still guide our nation and still call us to honor and cherish and protect the dignity of every human life.
So you heard him. He's basically paraphrasing the Declaration of Independence and explaining how we're trying to rededicate the country and return back to our founding principles. Now, this was on a show that not many people watch. It's MSNOW, or as I like to call it, MS No One Watching, because it's no one's watching it. But they had a host, Katie Tur, and she had this to say about it.
What about this passage from Mike Johnson declaring that our rights do not derive from government, they come from you, our Creator, and Heavenly Father? Is this him putting God over the Declaration of Independence? McKay?
Well, you know, I actually think that idea is not wholly uncommon. I mean, the idea that we have certain inalienable rights that come from God can be read in a fairly benign way, which is basically that we have innate human rights that our Constitution and our government, our democratic government, are meant to codify, right? That idea is not totally abnormal. I think that the thing that might alarm some people is some of the rhetoric that we heard at this rally that we are in a spiritual battle, right? That the forces of good and evil are at work here, and that that partisan politics is injected directly into the spiritual biblical rhetoric. We have heard that for the last couple of years. It's been ratcheted up more and more, especially since Donald Trump lost in 2020, and it can lead to some pretty dangerous places if it's not kept in check.
Apparently, Mike Johnson is breathing in Christianity into the Declaration of Independence, which is funny because I seem to remember that it's actually quite clear in there. I mean, we have this line, so this is verbatim from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator, with the capital C, with certain unalienable rights. And it continues and lists all the rights. And I'm not going to read it all because literally that's basically what Mike Johnson said. He was literally paraphrasing it. And she just got absolutely embarrassed here because, I mean, in what world can you say that this isn't the case? I mean, absolutely ludicrous. And it really goes to show that the people claiming to be fighting for this country and saving democracy, because that's what a lot of Democrats will say. They say that they're the actual people who support this country and that Trump and all the Republicans are authoritarians, dictators, fascists, and they're deliberately destroying our Constitution. But these people don't even understand our foundational documents. I mean, it's difficult to believe that she has actually read this, because it's like, this is such a common phrase that everybody uses when talking about the Declaration of Independence. So she obviously is completely out of touch with reality, just like the actual release of the Democrat autopsy of the 2024 election results, which is funny because they've been saying that they were going to release them pretty much since they found them, and they haven't yet. They've been resisting it every step of the way. You can see on screen, I have this from Politico. This is the Democratic National Committee blocks the release of its 2024 election autopsy. And this was last year because the chair of the Democratic National Committee actually campaigned on releasing this autopsy so that way everybody could see what actually happened in the 2024 election. And then they decided to not release it. And I mean, you can see here, it said that he said that there wasn't any, or he was questioned by what happened with that. Was there any utility in doing that in term referring to actually withholding the release? And he says, of course it will be released, referring to a future review on the 2024 election. There has to be some lessons that we glean on that so we can operationalize it, not just here in DC, but through all of the 57 state parties and of course the county parties, so people have a sense of what we need to do. And it didn't get released until this week. So it took a while for them to finally release it, but they did end up releasing it. And I did read through some of the abstracts of it. I haven't had the chance to sit down and read the whole thing, but in general, they didn't learn anything from 2024. I mean, you could see, I have a few quotes that I'll read from here. I'm not going to pull it up. Obviously, it's going to be in my sources, so you can go read it for yourself. It's, I believe, 192 pages, so kind of a lot to read, but if you have some time this week, I would highly recommend going through. Like I said, I'll be trying to do that with some of my free time. But they have this. While combating an increasingly autocratic and authoritarian government lies at the forefront of the Democratic agenda, our Democratic Party must also develop a plan to carry itself in America beyond 2028. Now, I mean, that's crazy to say because not only do they not provide evidence of there being an authoritarian or autocratic government in the first place, but they're also not actually saying what they stand for. If that's all that they stand against, they literally don't stand for anything. They have no reason that you should elect them. Even if you assume that that's correct, what's to say that they aren't the authoritarians and autocrats that want to take over from the existing authoritarians and autocrats that they are claiming exist? So that part is crazy. They also, and this is something where they actually admit that they're not doing as well as they thought that they were, where they're admitting, so to grow, we must admit and accept some hard truths about our party. Since the high point of the 2008 Obama landslide, when he received nearly 10 million more votes than John McCain, the Democratic Party has vacillated between stagnation and retrogression. In doing so, we have lost the confidence we once received from everyday Americans, and election results show it. Because they've been getting crushed. And actually, there's a huge shift in terms of Republicans actually gaining quite a bit of momentum from this. I believe that they start their mathematics in terms of when they start losing at about 2008, because they reference that as the peak. But yeah, I mean, they really started losing ground. And obviously, if you live in the real world, you know that it's because they're radicals now. But after this, in addition to this decline, they actually go into some detail on some of these reasons why they believe that they declined. And they say that of, quote unquote, of greater consequence is how the 2014 Republican gains featured the election of increasingly radical Republicans, which made normal governance nearly impossible. Now, I still don't believe that Republicans are radical whatsoever in almost any incident. I mean, we've gone through this week after week. I can't, off the top of my head, think of a single Republican policy that would be considered radical. I guess if you want to consider potentially stopping immigration for a period of time, that I would say is somewhat radical, but it's precedented based on what we've done in the past for immigration. So I really don't see what he means by radical, especially when you talk about the radicalism on the left, like political violence increasing. We see the transgenderism, the push for socialism, which is obviously pretty radical, the climate change stuff where everything needs to be green energy. You can't burn coal at all anymore. I mean, it's just crazy that they're claiming that Republicans, who are just trying to maintain the status quo, are the radicals. And it just shows that, like I said, they don't know what actually went wrong. And I mean, they even go in and say that, referring to, I believe this is 2016, they're referring to, a series of dramatic events, massive election interference, and poor strategy cost Democrats what many assume to be a history-making presidency. Despite a popular vote win, the so-called blue wall collapsed. Again, they're talking about massive election interference. They don't specify who was interfering in the election, because we know at this point that it was the Obama administration interfering in the election. They literally made up the Russia hoax, the Russia collusion hoax, because they wanted to hurt Trump. This is all documented. We have all the evidence now. We know that they were the ones interfering in the election. It wasn't the Republicans interfering in the election. And yet they won't even admit that. They just say that it was election interference. And then finally, I mean, they said, indeed, many of our critical Democratic wins can be attributed to negative partisanship, where Republicans have nominated deeply flawed candidates, and we have been able to convince some Republicans and most independents to support Democrats in those contests. Tell me, yes, I do agree that some of the Republican candidates are flawed in certain aspects. I mean, Trump's not a perfect human being, and neither is literally anybody. But he's been quite successful in politics. And they're claiming that they're bringing over Republicans so some Republicans and most independents to support Democrats, but Democrats are losing across the country. You can't be winning most independents and gaining support amongst some Republicans and losing elections. Like, the math just doesn't work out that way. And it just goes to show that these people are just so delusional. I mean, in what world is it somehow always your opponent's fault for being too radical that you are losing? If anything, you would think that the people who are more radical are the people who are losing, because that's how it tends to be. And in this instance, that's exactly what it is. Democrats can't admit that they are the radical ones, and they need to moderate if they want to have any political success in the future. I mean, that's the realistic, what they realistically should have learned from 2024. But they won't. And unfortunately, it seems like they're still continuing to push further in the opposite direction, getting more radical, with obviously we have Zohran Mamdani and AOC looking like she may be running for president soon, which would be interesting, I will have to admit, but we'll see. And before I even get to a little bit more about AOC, because of course I have to talk about her this week, we had CNN actually was the one who published this whole autopsy, and they actually had an article discussing what they found from the autopsy, because I'm assuming they read the whole thing, they had it in advance, and they actually published it. And they go in and say that the autopsy accuses the Biden administration of not doing more to boost Harris long before the president's June 2024 debate performance forced him to withdraw, particularly on immigration, given the Trump ad campaign tying the issue to her as the administration's so-called border czar, which is funny because I don't know why you would boost your vice president if you're running for president. So logically, that doesn't make sense. Unless, like every single reasonable person knew that Joe Biden was incapable of being president in a second term. I mean, that's what he should have been doing, but the Democrats couldn't admit that. They had to have him run as president for a second term because they couldn't put anybody else up. So they did that. That definitely hurt them, and I will admit that hurt them. But they mentioned that. Then they also say that it analyzes why Harris underperformed Democratic Senate candidates in states. They were also citing conversations with the Democratic Governors Association, Democratic Attorney Generals Association. Document has several firm conclusions about why Harris ran behind Stein, building to the assertion, candidate quality and name recognition matter for all down-ballot races, but some dynamics don't transfer uniformly across the ballot. Campaigns need to build their own contrast and definition. Common sense. If you can't run a campaign without having a message, and nobody's going to vote for you if you don't have a message, you don't have policies, you don't have, let alone good policies. I mean, you need good policies to win elections, but you need policies, period, to win an election. If you don't voice any policies, you're going to lose the election because nobody knows what you stand for, and they're not going to vote for somebody who they don't know what you stand for. So that was crazy. But they also mentioned some things that they wish that they had seen in this autopsy, because they said that it avoids many of the topics that have divided the party since 2024, such as Biden's decision to run again, because, like I said, any rational person knows that Biden shouldn't have run again. But he did anyways, and the Democrats let him do it. There was also Harris taking over as the nominee without a nomination process. I personally didn't hear much from Democrats complaining about that. And like I said, a lot of my friends are liberal or left-leaning. And yeah, there was no criticism of that. Anytime I would ask them about it, they would just say, well, I don't care. I mean, this is the party that claims to stand for democracy. They can't even have a democracy to choose who their primary candidate's going to be running in the presidential election. I mean, there's that. And then, of course, they had to insert the whole Israel issue here, too, where there was how the tickets positions on the war in Gaza affected Democrats in states like Michigan, because, of course, everything comes down to Israel. Again, I really hate talking about this stuff. I really don't understand why everything has to revolve around Israel, whether it's pro-Israel or anti-Israel. You're all talking about the same thing. Let's just stop it. Let's agree to focus on United States politics. When it comes up that it's actually important to us, or it actually benefits the U.S., we could talk about Israel and we can support stuff happening in Israel. But outside of those times when it actively benefits us, there is no reason for us to be talking about whether it's pro-Israel, anti-Israel, or anything like that. It's just a waste of time. That's all I'll say about that. But we also had AOC this week. She was talking in Montgomery, Alabama, about the recent redistricting push, because Democrats are obviously losing their minds over it, and she had this to say.
This Supreme Court, under Justice Roberts, is part of that long history of regression and repression in America. But they do not triumph, Montgomery. You triumph, Montgomery. And I am here today because I want to make sure that we all understand that Montgomery is not alone. That you all are not alone. And for all of those watching today, when they ask, what do we do in this moment? I feel helpless. What action can I take? It is time for the North to pull up to the South. It is time for New York to pull up to Alabama. It is time for all of us to come to Georgia, to Louisiana, to Tennessee, to Mississippi, and let them know exactly what they have uncorked
Now, in this clip, a lot of people will clip out the end portion of it and say that she was calling for civil war, which I think it is reasonable to interpret that she is, because it was obviously a reference to the American Civil War that she's referring to here, saying that the North needs to pull up to the South. So it's not unreasonable to conclude that. But she goes in and says that they're not going to allow Republicans to redistrict and kick them out of power, which is certainly interesting, because I somewhat agree with them that we shouldn't be doing this, but they've been doing exactly this for years. I mean, I showed you, I believe it was last week when I went over the gerrymandering in the Northeast, where we have approximately 40 to 50% Republican in terms of voting in these states in New England, and 0 Republican representation in terms of House of Representatives, which is where it tends to be. We do have 1 senator in Maine, but that's it. And somehow that's fair. But when Republicans followed the Constitution by eliminating racial gerrymandering, because we've talked about this before, there's nothing about your skin color should change anything about the way you vote. It should be based on your region, how you grew up, what type of environment you live in, and all that stuff, your values. Your skin color doesn't influence literally any of that. It may influence some of your culture, if you're big into following your family's culture. But realistically, we are formed by the product of the environments we live in, not necessarily our skin color or what race we are. And that's something that Democrats really need to start recognizing, because if they started spreading that message, I believe that would solve a lot of our race relation problems in the country. But not only is AOC saying that they won't allow Republicans to do that, Gavin Newsom actually went on and said that they have a quote unquote break glass in case of emergency plan if 2 Republicans win the primaries in California, in the gubernatorial race for California, because in the state of California, only the top 2 candidates actually go into the final governor election, which would mean that there would be a Republican as governor for California. And we'll play that clip now.
Governor, I know you admire Bobby Kennedy. He once said, you will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. You've shaped this balanced budget in California's direction over the last 8 years. In this governor's race, would you agree that an endorsement of a Democratic...
Oh, look at you. That was... He goes right to the heart with Bobby. I take my guard down, and then you try to get me to answer the question I refuse to answer.
Would you agree that this represents one of those moments where you could still change a small portion of and you've spoken
Did you have chat do that question for you? That's very sophisticated.
I like mine better. But you've spoken about accountability. Do you think Democrats will hold you accountable for standing by this principled neutrality by withholding your endorsement in this non-possible scenario where 2 Republicans take the ticket?
Yeah, look, my focus has been making sure that doesn't happen, and I've exercised not just a focus, but I've exercised through some action efforts to encourage that doesn't happen by making my case, and will continue to make my case. I do not see that scenario taking place. I see a lot of good Democrats I've worked with for years and years and years on the ballot making their case. I was in a similar position with a similar stubborn governor that refused to get involved. I developed tremendous animus towards him, and now I offer forgiveness. Yes. We don't dream regretting. We all have agencies. We can shape the future. There's still a lot of, look, I've said this before, so I'll repeat it. I don't anticipate this need to be the case, but there is a break the glass scenario. And there's many people that have a deep understanding of what it would look like if Democrats were locked out. And we're going to do everything to make sure that doesn't happen. I'll leave it at that.
So tell me again, which side is the one that's actively resisting or attempting to rig elections? I mean, because this is something I see all the time. Somebody I know from high school, he's going into politics, and he puts up this stuff all the time, talking about how Trump is rigging elections. When he literally reposted something Gavin Newsom put up, saying how Gavin was going to rig an election. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. You need to recognize this stuff for what it is. If you're going to say that one side is actually, like, if there was actually evidence of rigging elections, then I would argue that that should be prosecuted. But where is it? I mean, the redistricting, like I said, your race, it makes no sense to create entire districts based on your race. And if that race happens to vote majority Democrat, that it benefits me politically because I'm a conservative. I support the Republican Party. But it's not about the race. Every single person has the equal right to vote. They're not losing their right to vote because they're no longer having their own representative because they live in a minority majority district. It's just crazy to claim that that's rigging elections while this supposedly isn't, when he is literally saying he has a plan for if two Republicans make it to the final, to the actual election. Just absolutely crazy. And while hopefully some of the fraud in California will help improve the situation for Republicans and actually allow them to win this gubernatorial race, even though the polling doesn't indicate that's likely to be the case, we did also have some fraud in Minnesota, obviously. That was Nick Shirley started the investigations there. And it's finally coming to light that the DOJ charged 15 individuals this past week with, I believe it was a combined $90 million in intended loss. And that's absolutely insane. This was all healthcare fraud. So that's great that we're finally cracking down on it. I would like to see more arrests because I highly doubt that it was just 15 people in the entire state of Minnesota running all this healthcare fraud. But it would be great to see this happening more across the country. I know we've seen some in California. We just saw some in Ohio. That's another place we really need to get a lot of fraud. And I'm fairly confident that it's in just about every state. We really need a active fraud task force across the country, finding and rooting out fraud so our tax dollars aren't being wasted anymore on literal fraudsters. So that's great. Speaking of like the law and charges being brought up, we also had some updates with the Luigi and Mangione case. In this instance, the judge in the case, who has been extremely favorable to Luigi Mangione, which tends to indicate where their values lie. They most likely liberal, left-leaning. I believe they're being prosecuted in New York under DA Alvin Bragg. He was the one who literally campaigned on getting Trump, and that's where Trump was charged with the quote-unquote 34 felonies. But in this instance, this judge somehow found that some evidence found in Mangione's backpack during an initial search was inadmissible. Which, okay, that's fine if that's the case where he wasn't read his rights and he wasn't properly informed that he didn't have to consent to the search, then that's fair. But simultaneously, while that evidence was suppressed, they allowed the evidence of what he said to the officers at the same time. I don't know how you can square the two where literally at the same moment he's being searched and he's being questioned, and somehow the questioning is perfectly legal and wasn't a violation of his constitutional rights, but the searching of his bag at the same moment was a violation of his constitutional rights. Doesn't make much sense. I guess you could potentially argue that there wasn't reasonable suspicion, but I'm fairly confident that wasn't the case because they had received a tip. As far as if I'm remembering correctly, they had received a tip and they identified him from that tip. So that would be a reasonable search and seizure from my current understanding of the law and everything in New York City. But yeah, so the evidence that was deemed inadmissible is it's a loaded handgun magazine, a cell phone, and a computer chip, while in a subsequent search, so after he was booked into the police department, they did a second search, and this stuff was all admissible because he had been read his rights at this time, which, again, like I said, if he hadn't been read his rights and they searched his bag, that's fine, and it should be inadmissible. But it doesn't make sense that that should be inadmissible, but everything that he said at the same time was admissible. I mean, it's just illogical. So there's not much that you can really say or do about it at this point, but I would really like to see judges actually holding logical arguments in addition to following the Constitution. But that's all you can really ask for. There's not really much you can do about it outside from asking for it. But we also had another indictment this week. We had Raul Castro indicted. And this is big because obviously they've been talking for a while about us potentially working with Cuba or taking over, however you want to refer to it. It's definitely interesting that this is happening. And the reason I haven't really covered it much is because nothing has actually happened in regards to it. The only reason I bring this up is because this is kind of what happened with Maduro. They secured an indictment for Maduro, and then they went in and grabbed him and basically took out the regime. I understand that it's still the same regime, but the people in charge now are significantly more willing to work with the U.S., at least currently. Obviously, it's only been a few months, so we can't tell long term. But at the moment, it's looking like they're more U.S. They're more interested in working with the U.S. than resisting the U.S. And this article from CBS is actually quite interesting because if you look at the end of this little snippet I clipped out, when Todd Blanche was asked about how if he was going to be brought to the U.S. to actually stand trial for his alleged crimes, he said, "This isn't a show indictment," and that the Justice Department intends to try the case. He said, "There's all kinds of different ways to bring in defendants who are located in other countries." So, to me, that is an indication that we may be seeing another operation similar to Venezuela, or potentially there will be some little uprising or some resistance within the existing government that will turn Raul Castro in to gain more favor with the U.S. government. We'll see. Obviously, I can't tell the future. Personally, I would like to see the Iran stuff finished first because that has gone on for way too long. I've said this for the past few weeks. It's been going on way too long. It needs to be done. Americans are hurting from it. It needs to be done. But at the same time, I am kind of in favor of it. Like I've said before, I love smoking cigars. It's probably my favorite hobby that I have right now. And Cuban blends are pretty good. Right now, I prefer the Nicaraguan blends a bit more, but it would be nice to be able to get some more Cuban blends in the country and have a few of those more often. Getting past that, though, in terms of like national security on a international level, today we actually had some surprise and very sad news that Tulsi Gabbard was resigning as DNI, and it's truly sad because she's resigning because her husband was just diagnosed with a very rare form of bone cancer. So please keep him and her in your prayers because obviously I really like Tulsi. She's been doing great. I understand that she used to be a Democrat, but that really doesn't matter to me. She's served our country as a military member. She's done great work, both as a politician as well as so far as DNI. She's done great work. I really support her, and nobody really deserves to live through having a family member, or especially a close family member, especially your spouse, have a potentially life-threatening cancer, especially one that's, in this case, a rare bone cancer, because from my understanding of it, it's not something that a lot of people walk away from. So please keep them in your prayers. I mean, she's a great person from what I've seen, and I wish her well in her time outside of the government for now. So in addition to that, we also had a little bit of a shakeup today. We finally had a new chair of the Federal Reserve named, and that was Kevin Warsh. He was just sworn in earlier today. And this is something that I love that Trump did, because everybody always says that Trump hates Jerome Powell and he's being political about it. And he only chose Kevin Warsh because Kevin Warsh is going to be political. And that's, if you want to say that, that's fine. But there's not really any evidence of that. And in fact, if you actually read this is from CBS. These are a few quotes that were from the actual swearing-in ceremony, where Kevin Warsh said that he will, quote unquote, lead a reform-oriented Federal Reserve, learning from past successes and mistakes, both escaping static frameworks and models and upholding clear standards of integrity and performance, which is, that's great. That's what we want to hear. We want people who are looking to actually improve and learn from the mistakes of the past as opposed to just repeating them over and over again, because that's what we've always done. So that's great. But then Trump actually said, quote unquote, honestly, I really mean this. This is not said in any other way. I want Kevin to be totally independent, Mr. Trump said. I want him to be independent and just do a great job. Don't look at me. Don't look at anybody. Just do your own thing and do a great job, okay? This is exactly what we want. We want them to be independent. We don't want them playing politics. Ideally, we wouldn't need a Federal Reserve, period. But if we're going to have one, they should be nonpartisan. They shouldn't be supporting one party over the other. The only somewhat political thing that they should be doing is making sure that we don't go socialist, because, I mean, you can't really have economic policy with socialism, because socialism is inherently against all economic principles that we know, including supply and demand. But outside of that, they really shouldn't be getting political whatsoever. And speaking of people who shouldn't be getting political, Stephen Colbert is finally off the air. His final episode was this past week. And luckily, he's not going to be on, he's not going to have his late night show anymore. This is great news. I've said it before. I believe I was talking about Jimmy Kimmel a few weeks ago when I was talking about this. But if you're a comedian, don't get involved with politics. Like, unless you start out in politics and then work in comedy and you want to be like a political comedian, that's fine. But in terms of these late night shows, people watch them just for the comedy. They don't want to hear your political takes or anything like that. They want to sit down and relax after a long day at work and hear some jokes. They want to laugh. And politics is just so divisive nowadays that when you do stuff like this, you are basically alienating half of your audience. And I actually picked this article from AP to talk about it because a lot of people say that this was political, that he was kicked off the air because of Trump's feud with him. There's no indication that that's the case. In fact, AP actually, because AP is a left-wing source, and it's interesting because even they're admitting that they can't claim that the show is profitable or not because they don't have the numbers, but it's pretty reasonable to conclude that it isn't profitable because late night TV is such a declining demographic and it's losing money that there's not really much of an incentive to actually continue investing in it. And that's why it got canceled in the first place. But not only was Stephen Colbert's show ended because it's not financially feasible anymore from every single indication that I've seen, but his replacement is looking to be great. His replacement is Byron Allen. And so far, so I have this from Mediaite. He literally says that he doesn't want to talk politics. This is a quote. His goal is simple: just be funny. A lot of eyes are going to be on your program to see, well, what are the political leanings? What can they read into it? And this was from an interview with him. He said, "What I'm doing with Comics Unleashed, we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about anything that's topical," which that's great. I don't want politics in my comedy for most of it. I mean, every once in a while I'll watch Erin Wexler because she's quite funny. She is a bit political, but from my understanding, she's always been political, and it wasn't like she started off doing, or she just moved into political comedy because she wanted to offend people. So that's great. My one concern is that he did continue. So this quote doesn't end there. He does continue on to say, "We don't do anything that's racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or homophobic. Just be funny and don't offend." I agree with that last part. Just be funny and don't offend. But my one concern is that he says that he won't do anything that's racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, or homophobic. My only question is who is setting these standards? Because if we're using the standards that the left has set, then that eliminates a huge chunk of comedy. I mean, Shane Gillis probably won't even be on there whatsoever with any of his jokes because, and he's quite funny. He's not even that political, but he's a pretty funny guy. He's not politically correct, but he has a lot of jokes that could reasonably fall under these categories if somebody is interpreting it that way. So we'll wait and see. But this is a good indication for the future, and I really hope that we can get back to late night shows being about the comedy and not about politics. Well, that's all that I have for you tonight. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. If you could please like and subscribe this. I don't get paid to do this. I do this for you guys just because I feel like it's important for everybody to know what's going on, have a rational view on politics nowadays. So thank you very much. I'll catch you next week on The Ben Corriveau Show.